Yours was psychology, as I understand. Okay. I think that my background had a big influence on the way that I look at life as a filmmaker. I'm wondering if your background as psychologists had an
It's
influence.
funny you say that because people call us anthropologists.
Do
The
they?
nature of our films, they kind of think they're sort of anthropological.
Yeah.
I don't, but our background,
Actually, anthropology is a very apt description of our approach. I don't think it has anything to do in our case with professional academic training. The key to the thing is that in anthropology, you're not supposed to take a point of view.
Right.
And in fact, early on, when we began making our movies, everybody said, you forget your approach because you've got to take a point of view. It's not art, it's not interest, no one's going to want to see it. You can't make a movie unless it's a point of view. All of which discouraged me immensely because I thought, well, I guess they're not going to call it movies anymore, whatever, but this is the way we have to do it.
Mm.
And then I was at a lecture preceding a film that we were showing, actually Grey Gardens in Chicago somewhere, when we used to take the film around ourselves too. And this man who was lecturing on Shakespeare said that the great thing about Shakespeare was that he could distance himself from a point of view. I finally thought, at last, my God, that's what I should have known 15 years ago.
Right.
I could have justified our approach. But I think that our anthropological approach really comes more from our family background than anything else.
Right. But
As
not
brothers, brothers, we shared a family life where both of our parents, working class people. My mother was a teacher, my father was a postal clerk. They both had this extraordinary curiosity about all kinds of life. They yearned to travel everywhere with open eyes, to explore the world. And we've got that too.
Mm-hmm.
well,
But not psychology from the professional.
of course, I never knew what the definition of point of view was. So
Right.
I always thought, point of view, what's point of view? I mean, point of view is maybe no point of view, or a lot of point of view. And who cares? It's what you finally see on the screen.
Well,
But it does tend to, any point of view tends to limit your point of view. To make it more of a work of propaganda and of what you expect to get is what you get.
Right.
And that's not anthropology, and it's making something that's not going to last very long as a film.
But you're saying how, you're asking
Could you please talk?
Quiet!
how we're motivated,
Yeah.
and were we motivated by our academic background in psychology in both cases, to a certain extent. And I think it's like Al said, it's more family motivated. We see things in the characters that we're interested in. We look at all these things on reflection. We never go into a film and say, well, start analyzing why we're doing it. But after it's all over, we start thinking about it. And in the case of Grey Gardens, I think it's quite clear that the Beals, the mother and daughter, attracted the two brothers because we saw a lot of my aunt and the feistiness of Mrs. Beale, and a certain amount of my mother in Mrs. Beale, in her appreciation of small things, of little things, of just wrapping paper and things like that. She'd wonder, and she'd be in awe of just so many, and curious about so many things. And she'd tell these wonderful stories like my mother. Her favorite play was Glass Menagerie, like my mother. I mean, all these things sort of came out, and her feistiness was like my aunt, and my mother and my mother's sister. And there was things that we recognized in these people, whether it be the Rolling Stones, certain things we recognized in our childhood, or whether it be Grey Gardens, the mother and daughter, The Salesman, a lot of it came from my father's background and from our background, growing up with being Jewish, growing up with Boston Irish. The brogue certainly was, Paul's Irish brogue was, my father was one of two Jews, I believe, in the Boston post office. And he had a wonderful Irish brogue. And a love-hate relationship with the Irish. and we had a similar kind of thing. So we were interested in Boston Irish.
So you didn't really, as most documentary filmmakers, in fact, go out and say, here's an important social issue, let's say migrant workers, acid rain, the nuclear situation, and how can we make
Last
a
thing
film
in the
about
world that we'd ever be interested in doing.
Right.
Last
Never
thing
do
in the
that.
world.
Yeah. Well, we're interested in reading
Because I
about
think those things can be done better as lectures or books. I think approaching it our way, which is not to say that we avoid any issues, but those issues sort of come up in a natural way, like the whole issue of not unimportant, I would say, is our American value system. You could lecture on that, but I don't think you can come up with in a movie that means anything as powerfully as it crops up throughout every single inch of Salesman.
Right.
But we didn't do it saying, oh, we're going to tell all of our American values. No, we were interested in these poor guys who sell the Bible.
So interesting. Our background is sort of psychology, sociology,
Yeah.
yet we're not interested in making films about them in a direct way,
Yeah.
in a very, very indirect way.
Well, I think you raise a million points here, but the thing that
Movies aren't pure information.
No, all right. But the reason why you probably got flack in the early days, or why you, in a sense, were having
Still
to
getting it.
justify, was because there was a very articulate man running around the world saying that the documentary should be something different, and that was John Grierson. I mean, the whole Grierson tradition was that he said, I am in a pulpit, right, and we are preaching from the pulpit.
Disaster.
But he had a background, he had a family background, which was the teacher-preacher background, you see. And then why
Actually, a nice guy, too.
Yeah, and the reason I picked up on the psychology-sociology thing was that he came to this country in the 20s to do sociology at the University of Chicago, became friends with Walter Lippmann and people like that. And they were filled with a burning thing that you had to make film an educated tool, because democracy would not last unless you could somehow give the masses a way of understanding this complex, crazy world that was the post-war world.
Okay, we'll pick it up from there. What was Flaherty's motivation, do you think?
Flaherty was see life as it is. He didn't really, of course he manipulated all the time, but this is why Grierson and Flaherty fought all the time.
Well, they did.
Oh, they did.
Cats and dogs.
I
They loved to
always
hate each other.
had this generous attitude to Flaherty because, for one thing, Ricky adored him, and so I was disposed to think that if Flaherty made these mistakes about manipulation, that it was simply because he didn't have the sync sound equipment, that he had to do it only as a visual thing, and speech had to be was such a handicap for him not to be able to use the natural speech that he had to make up for that and say it in a different, more artificial way. Ricky always claimed that if he had the equipment, if Flaherty had the equipment that we have available now for the last 20 years, that he'd be doing very much like what we do ourselves.
I don't believe that.
Hard to say.
I think he was a complete romantic, and I think that what he picked and chose in his subject the things that appealed to his romantic sensibility. And just like you say that your motivation is his family connection.
Which is romantic, too.
Yes, he was an adventurer. I mean, he started as a mining engineer, and he was an adventurer. He went to have a romantic adventure, and he
It's
wanted
not
to
the
film
way
them.
some people with having established a way of professional life for them, some of them, most of them will have to stick to that particular pattern of things when they apply it to another art, let's say. But then some great one comes along, like Tolstoy, for example, and the first time he saw any film at all, which was of himself sitting on a porch, he looked at it and his comment was, now we don't have to invent stories. All we have should do is just go around Russia filming ordinary people, which is to say an anthropological approach.
Right, right.
He had the intuition to drop everything that he was doing
Right.
and say, no, movies is something special. Let's use movies according to its own devices, which are different from writing, from theater, whatever, and take that unique capability and apply it with purity.
Right. Okay, well now, to go to this point of view thing, okay, you didn't have the point of view, but you were also not interested in the sociological phenomenon, because you could say, I'm
Only as
interested...
they come out of it.
I know, but you didn't make it your point of departure. You
Right.
didn't say, I'm interested in the city or the neighborhood. and I'm going to do a film about this phenomenon, and then from that point of departure go to find a character, did you? You really stumbled across characters. Although I did read that when you were doing salesman, that in fact you did start with the idea of salesman in general.
Yes.
And you did work your way down to
Salesman
Bible.
because of a romantic interest, really.
Uh-huh.
The idea of a salesman traveling, not knowing what's going to happen next when he opens the door. That's a romantic thing on them in the motels, on the road, the relationship between him and other salesmen. And more than anything else, the salesman himself. But we didn't know. What did we know when we went into salesman? We knew that there was going to be an adventure.
Mm-hmm.
And that adventure probably would be interesting because selling is such a dramatic thing. That was really the beginning of it.
Mm-hmm.
After we made the film, I ran across a quotation from Charles Lamb, and he said that there's nothing as sweet in life, whether it's in the country or the city, as the sound of the knocking on a door, right? So here are these salesmen knocking on doors, and that sweetness, which could be vastly human and beautiful, is limited, as you know, by the fact that they're in there to sell something, even though it's the Bible.
Right.
It can also be very inhuman.
Isn't that a beautiful kind of apt description of our lives today?
Mm.
Our focus is limited by the fact that it's got to be commercial, which is the limitation on every single film practically that's made, certainly in Hollywood.
And also, I think selling was something that my father was very reluctant to do.
Mm.
Because my father, growing up Jewish in a Catholic neighborhood, if you will, Irish Catholic neighborhood, was, for example, he had some small property, but tiny kind of property. He couldn't collect the rent. He couldn't sell. He didn't want to sell. Now, the lower middle class Jewish family, the idea was either one or two things. Either you become a professional person, a doctor or a lawyer, or you become a salesman. Well, he sort of, I guess, if he had a little more security, he might have gone toward being the professional person. But he rejected salesmanship, evidently. And what he did do was become a government, pension employee, which was total security. The thing that the salesman rejected
Right.
with anger.
Mm. Mm. That business at the door, you also said somewhere else that there's nothing more exciting than the knock on the door.
Yeah.
That moment of who is it? What is coming into my life?
So I mean, this grand American dream, which is not undignified, that when you go out selling, it is whatever you can do
Right.
that's going to make the sale. What I mean, it's
an
the
expression.
ultimate expression of individualism.
You know what the expression is? Well, it's the ultimate expression of individualism, but it's also an expression in salesmanship. You're on your own hook. Now, there's a double meaning there.
On your own hook.
You're on your own hook. In other words, you don't need anybody else. All you need is a grand, free enterprise system. And you go out there, you knock on the door, and you make the sale. And you don't have to please your manager. You have to report at 9 o'clock in the morning and quit at 5.
Right.
You could start at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and finish at 8 if you want, or not work at all and make up for it the next day. You're on your own hook. Well, the hook can work both ways.
Talking about romance, I like we picked up on that word. It seems to me that your style of the actual way of making film, which the early interviews with you talk a tremendous amount about the type of camera, about the way you interrelate. It seems to me that was very romantic. There's something very romantic about the way you interrelated with your subjects.
Well,
Use that funny
actually,
word.
I mean, to carry over what we were just saying about being on your own hook, I mean, for years we were trying to find a way of being that independent as movie makers, totally independent, and
Still
we've
are.
always
Still trying to.
maintained that, but there's a hook to it. That is, in our own case, we've had to devote practically 90% of our time making commercials and industrial films, doing them very, very well, and making enough money to pay this enormous expense for our own films.
It's like
But
getting
we've
in a
been
rut.
able to make half a dozen of our own films, some of them costing over $500,000.
It's getting in a rut. And maybe, it just popped into my mind the rut that maybe Fitzgerald was about to get into or got into when he had to do scripts and pieces for the Saturday Evening Post in order to make money,
Right.
to travel and do what he wanted to do, or to have a roof over his
Right.
head.
Now, when I said romantic, what I meant was that there is a degree of affection between you and the subjects, a sort of intimacy which makes it so different from the old way of filming where people were manipulated to make the point.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I used the word romantic. And in fact, in Grey Gardens, there seems to be almost a real romance happening between
Well,
either
there is,
one of
yeah.
you and
Edie
little
expresses it.
Edie.
Edie
Yes.
expresses it, yeah.
I mean, that's the ultimate of it. That, am I right about that? There is a sort of romantic element in terms of human affection?
Well, there was in that picture, and there was in Salesman, and there was in Gimme Shelter. There was in all of them, yes. I don't know if that necessarily will happen in the next one, but it did happen in those.
You have to really like the people that you're filming to the point where you're willing to let anything go. I mean, it's
They are too.
Yeah, and they have to. It may turn out that you don't like them as much after it or more. We've always found that we like them more because I think the more you know of a person, the more you get to understand them. There has to be some affection come out of that too.
Well,
It's quite the opposite of, let's say, something like doing a film, the kind that's been done on Nixon, for example, where the curious thing that happened, and the one that D'Antonio made, was that most people, I think, at least I felt that way, got to be more sympathetic for Nixon, which was contrary to the purpose that D'Antonio had. But I think anything that we would do, I think you'd like Nixon more, probably more than D'Antonio
Right.
did, because he
human
is a
being.
human. He is.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that going back to the psychology, sociology? I mean, if you're the sociological type of filmmaker, you're the guy who's photographing roles. In other words, if you're Peter Davis doing Hearts and Minds, Westmoreland is a role more than a complex, tortured individual. Whereas when you do people, you're not looking at the Beals as
No,
roles.
I don't know.
Funny you say
as-
that. I'm always more sympathetic for the Westmorlands, for the Barbara Couples character who was the strikebreaker.
Right.
I always wanted to know those people, the people that live on the fringes, the outside people, the people that they're trying to put down, if you will. I've always wanted
Right.
to know more about them, have some sympathy for the devil, if you will. I mean, some kind of
But isn't that-
understanding for them because they're more interesting. The other people are obvious targets.
Is that just a perversity on your part, or
No.
something to do with power?
I like the
fact that they're
outsiders. I
powerful.
like, because no, I think it's necessary to know the outsiders.
Yeah.
And to have some understanding of them. That's what you know, if you're going to have a purpose for doing something,
Yeah.
you should, those are the people you don't know.
Mm.
Those are the unknowns. Those are the people you might want to discover.
Isn't
You were talking
that-
before about
what you-
love and romance
Yeah.
for the people. I think, looking back on it, obviously it has to be love and romance. Otherwise, there's no trust. If there's no trust, there's no opening up. If there's no opening up, there's no film.
Mm.
I mean, the time to quit filming a particular subject is when you've touched that subject. The subject has touched something or something sensitive in their lives or something. In the case of Great, well, you can see them all. Killing in Gimme Shelter, Paul's leaving salesmanship and Mrs. Beale in that pink room when she's practically in tears and they get together and they discovered something about themselves. Well, those things would never happen, those moments, which are the moments of all those films, if there wasn't any love.
Right.
Because without love, there would be no trust.
But isn't behind that, the key thing for me as an attitude is that people's contradictions are all right, that we can love them with their contradictions.
Of course.
Whereas if you're doing this other, let's say, more crusading filmmaking, what you're saying is, I want to catch this person in his contradictions. I don't want to really understand them. I just want to pin him down. There's a man called Silverstein who was interviewed during this Peter Davis conference last year, and he said that his idea of film was to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. which is a clever phrase, you know, but what you can see what it's getting at is to pin the nicks into the wall.
I'm afraid that,
pin-
as I pointed out with the antenna, I think they achieve the opposite. It works against them. My sort of model for that thing is Fred Wiseman's film, the only one I saw. After I saw that, I didn't want to see any of the other ones.
Is that true? You've only seen one?
Yeah, the first one, the first non-fiction one. His first film that he made was a fiction film, with I can't think of it right now. But then he went on to do
Ticket Follies.
Mental Hospital.
Ticket Follies.
Ticket Follies. Well, his purpose was, what did you just say?
Comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable.
Right. So his purpose was to afflict the man at the administration of the mental hospital, right? And to comfort the inmates of the hospital. So the way he did it was never to show any sync sound of the poor afflicted, right? Never to show them as human beings. You ended up with thinking that these mentally ill people are really nutty, that they never have a moment of humanity or capability of having a sense of what's around them. They come off as robots, as nuts, right? Which they aren't. You see,
kind of thing is very
all for the sake of giving comfort to them. You see, so that it's one of the most anti-human films I've ever seen.